I'm going to try to be speedy and trying to bring it through some complicated topics and hopefully try to bring a better idea about what we can do about transformative infrastructure and economic resiliency puzzle. We are going to give you some indicative lessons from the GCF project pipeline, and I'm going to mention a case of a city in the LAC region where we're going to make investment. So for introduction, the rationale for climate transformative change urban investment is based on UNFCCC Technical Paper 13 from 2014, which is referring to integrated cross-sectoral mitigation activities in urban areas that illustrate the transformational impact. So it looks for strong mitigation action and climate resilient development at the local level across the key sectors such as buildings, transport, and waste. Another urban climate change resilience definition that I like is from ADB. And it says that urban climate change resilience is a capacity of cities to function so that the people living and working in the cities, particularly the poor and the vulnerable, survive and thrive in the face of shocks and stresses related to climate change. Also, what I would like to put to your attention is that is frequently forgotten is that we also, the global cooperation or collaboration on urban resilience that was done in Medellin in Colombia in April 2014 by 10 institutions, where they're trying to foster harmonizations of the approaches and tools available to cities, catalyzing access to existing innovative financing mechanisms. Innovative financing mechanisms is something I think we have not discussed enough on this forum, including risk-based instruments to reduce exposure and vulnerability to shocks and increase cities' adaptive capacity, something that has not been tackled properly, and supporting, of course, the capacity development. So this is how cities which are not resilient look like. This is a picture from Manila, and you can imagine what happens when the hurricane strikes. Just a quick look into megacities urbanization and sprawl. What is very important to understand for cities, and that's the emphasis of these presentations, is that the cities are economic engines. I mean, you stop the cities, you stop the global development. So resilience does not only have a context of improving livability under the climate change, it also have the challenge of safeguarding the core economic growth for each country. So if you look into some of the cities, for instance, Jakarta has 26% of Indonesian economy. Manila represents 62% of Filipino economy. Bangkok represents almost 72% of Thai economy. Yeah, so how do we organize cities? We can either reduce or increase issues related to resilience, and we are certainly increasing pressure on energy, natural resources, pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm mentioning here a paper that deals with the climate change and economic growth. This is, I think, nothing new to you. We clearly see that the higher temperatures substantially reduce economic level of output and economic growth rates in poor countries, but have little or no effect in rich countries, which is why the climate finance should be and is focusing on developing countries. High temperatures also have a wide-ranging effect in poor nations, reducing agricultural output, industrial output, and aggregate level of investment. So economic vulnerability risks are immense due to the climate change. And when we discuss the resilience, we should be thinking primarily how to safeguard the economic vulnerability. I'll bring you a step further. When we then discuss the economic growth and resilient economic growth in the face of the climate pressure, we should also say that structural transformation argues that the sustained economic growth is closely related to structural change. So especially, and this is especially true for developing countries. So economic growth is a miracle sustained for a period of decades, clearly not only just a one-stop shop of the continuing of introduction of new goods, but continued learning on continuing improvement on how do we introduce goods to the market. So the structural change is about the transformation of economy by transferring resources to higher productivity. Cities really mean a higher productivity. Resilience means that you cannot stop the higher productivity if you want to make people resilient. So it's about diversifying production, upgrading exports, and increasing labor productivity. All come under pressure due to the climate change. So a country's capability for structural change can be revealed by its position in the product space, which I'm going to explain in a second. So what we are saying is that the structural change of today and tomorrow needs to be driven by green, low carbon, and resilient intervention, because the developing countries are keen to learn what are the policy interventions that will lead to faster structural changes such as significant changes in the output and employment structure. Business as usual cannot happen because we are fast depleting the global carbon budget. Therefore, the structural change needs to be decisively and irrevocably resilient, low carbon, to be transformational. So we have to keep innovating, we have to keep producing, and we still have to take care of the climate change. That's the complexity of today. So answer to that is that we cannot look resilience separately from capabilities. Capabilities come together with the resilience. This is complicated, just a product space. Usually a country positions within a product space signals capacity to expand to more sophisticated products, therefore indicating economic growth. Nobody's ever thinking how the climate change will actually affect this growth. Yeah? So here is what we are saying again, that much of developing countries are on the periphery of the core global markets and therefore cannot properly compete. And under the climate change, they're going to come into even increasing pressure. So we have to, as far as developing countries are concerned, we have to have policies that lead to accumulation of capabilities, but we also have to have policies and financing that leads to consideration of resilience to climate change in order for countries to maintain and sustain their economic growth. So how can GCF support to mainstreaming transformational resilient investments in urban areas? I think we need to continue pursuing transformational and resilient urban puzzle with the way that we have early consultations about the interventions in the design process. We properly consider climate resilience considerations, including significant social development issues and safeguards. We achieve synergies across sectors. We deal with the implementation complexity, and we have adaptation investments that involve always additional stakeholders, issues to be addressed in the project preparation and structuring process. So when we develop scenarios, climate-sensitive urban growth, we look into the GDP growth, population growth, degree of urbanization, international energy prices coupled with climate information, restrictions on emissions, and issues of integration of economy to understand whether we're going to have high growth or moderate growth for a specific country, and how this can be then, how we can empower city governments to develop strategic plans and successfully execute climate actions with effective sectoral and cross-sectoral measures. So that's the puzzle of today. So the question is, what should resilience-conscious cities do? I think the answer that GCF is probably providing is that we have to manage initially climate services and mapping vulnerabilities. We have to combine downscaled climatic information and projections and with mapping vulnerabilities on the ground to make the connection, because far too many projects have either developmental angle or far too many projects are just focusing on infrastructure, but we have to kind of combine and try to understand what is the climate change impact to the specific development trajectory of the country, whether it's sufficiently transformational, whether it's sufficiently low carbon. So how significant is the correlation between a downscaled climatic information and mapping vulnerabilities on the ground? That's how we correctly use the available climate finance architecture. So downscaling is explained here. I'm not going to read it to you. I think that for those who do not understand downscaling, they can have information from this slide. Resilience-conscious cities should have a core adaptation strategy, which would be to equip national, regional, and city governments and leaders with climate prediction and forecast, to install a culture of forward planning and prevention, to forecasting skill at a shorter time scales is higher than over longer time scales, and we have to change that. So we have to be able to really predict the climate change impacts medium term and long term, and not short term. And as I said before, we have to continue map vulnerabilities. So various stages of vulnerability mapping include identification of local hazards, assessment of local vulnerabilities, and production of maps showing risk zones to which then we can respond. Finally, as the purpose of this workshop is to discuss case studies, I'm going to present to you a small case study from a city in the Latin America. I'm specifically not mentioning city or country because this is a live transaction and it's going to probably enter discussion at the next board, so I'm not going to reveal too much information. But the proposed program focuses on building a resilient and adaptive community around the historical downtown district with a combination of highly vulnerable population, historical and cultural landmarks. Essentially, you have a city which is very prone to flooding, but any drainage facility will have issues with informal settlements. Yeah? So informal settlements are all over the place. So you cannot tackle this. You can tackle this engineering-wise, but you cannot tackle this without proper social safeguards in place. What do you do with people which are in a flood area and they live there for 20 years illegally? How do you manage the informal settlement, and how do you handle very sensitive safeguards issue related to the adaptation investment? That is a really big problem in most of the global cities today. So the district has a problem with infrastructure, with sanitary and environmental services, and a fading sense of community. So the program wants to center on adapting and strengthening the resilience of district and its adjusted floodplain by developing sustainable housing practices, transport-oriented development, education and training programs, flood protection infrastructure, construction of new public parks, and environmental ecosystem restoration. This is going to be an intervention of about $400 million. The intervention will be divided into 4 main components: rehabilitation of stream, rehabilitation and creation of public parks, and construction of flood protection structures as a resilience measure. Let me just suggest to you that we in GCF often look into the Dutch examples of how the water resilience is managed, because what Dutch science really believes is that the water should flow naturally. So you should not be stopping with infrastructure the natural flow of water. Yeah, because this is the best way to create defenses. So in the same way, in fact, we will have to replace a good portion of a city which is on a floodplain and create enough space for the flooding to occur naturally in places where people should not live. We should also be looking into rehabilitation and conservation of the biodiversity and the ecological structure of the area through soil movement and landscaping, and strengthening resilience of the adjacent port infrastructure, and promoting the densification of the historical downstream district by refitting ecological and dynamic corridors. So it's a complicated project. I don't want to dwell too much, but I mean, this is the example of how we handle resilience in a complex project. We try to tackle significant issues that are related to the resilience of a city. So maybe as a conclusion, what would be the anticipated outcomes? It will be obviously increased resilience of the city and adjacent floodplains. It will be improved quality of life and a safer life. It will be a reduction of cost associated with flood events due to relocation of affected population. So imagine this, that approximately every 5 years there is a flood event that costs affected families a total of about 1.2 million per event. So we're going to stop that. And we're going to diversify the energy matrix through installation of solar cells and solar heaters. Strengthen the community, restore more than 700 hectares of ecological areas. We're going to revert the horizontal expansion model of the urban development by providing adequate conditions to repopulate downtown with proper mixed-use residential development. So we're going to essentially move the population from flood areas, and we're going to also have a potential energy saving associated cost to that. So I'm sorry I cannot say more about this transaction, but this is typically what we would be a case how to approach resilient infrastructure investment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Drazen. I think that was a very good presentation, straight to the point, and it brings in a new dimension, which is resilient cities.